Stone Librande, and creative director of Maxis. Also, as I just mentioned, the lead designer of SimCity. I've actually been working on that game for 2 years now, so for the last 2 GDCs, I've had to hide that little bit off my slide. So it's nice to finally be able to come out and say that. I'm not going to be talking about the game at all today, so I'm going to be talking about not even EA or Maxis. I'm going to be talking about my kind of side job that I have of teaching game design. So I want to start out with something that's not really game design. It's this great book, Paper Engineering, and I had picked it up a while back. And what I really liked about this book was kind of the first page is, here's 10 working models for how to make pop-ups. These are really simple. They're designed to be as simple as possible because he wants to show you the mechanics, the structure behind how these things work. It kind of defeat the purpose if they were really complicated. The book's great, so there's a section for each one of these 10 models. And the best part of it, though, is that you actually build the models and you can glue them back into the book. So as you're reading the book, you're making your own pop-up book at the same time. And it's just a really fun book to play with, but it's a great way to learn. And in a way, the games that I'm going to be talking about today, they're the equivalent of what you're seeing here. So I've designed a set of games that were meant to kind of lay bare the basic fundamentals of game design in a way that this little box lays bare the basics of this particular pop-up paper. And then the series of games that I've made, you can think of it like the book. You know, that you put them all together, and then when you run through that course, you would have a really good understanding of game design. So for those of you in the audience who are full-time game designers, have been doing this a long time, the point of the talk is not really to say, oh, I'm going to teach you the fundamentals of game design. You already know them. What I am doing here is an extreme form of deconstruction, where I'm trying to remove everything possible from the game except the one idea that I want to communicate to the students. And it was a real fun, challenging design task. Harder than I would think at first. It's like, oh, making something simple, that's easy. It turns out sometimes making something simple is harder than making complex things where you can just keep throwing stuff onto it. So before I get into it, I'll talk briefly about the overview and the class background and my philosophy of teaching that class. Then a little bit about the fundamentals of game design. What are these things I'm trying to teach anyway? If I don't know what the fundamentals are, it's hard to make games about them. Most of the talk, the majority of the talk, will be spent talking about the games themselves, so I'll kind of run through them all and describe to you, how they worked, lessons I learned from building them, and then the lessons the students are supposed to learn from playing them. And then just a little quick final thoughts, wrap up at the end. So I've been teaching classes for, it's about 11 years now. I actually started teaching classes right before I first got my job at Blizzard. So even before I was in the game design industry, I was teaching game design classes, and that was like 2001. I started teaching at Cogswell Polytechnical College, which, if you don't know, it's about 40 miles south down in Sunnyvale. It's a great school. The game design workshop, which Mark LeBlanc and a few of us run every Monday and Tuesday here at GDC, which it looks like a lot of you have attended, and so you understand that format. Game Connection in Paris, which is another event in Europe that they have. I've taught workshops there. And then at EA, I take the Maxis interns and I kind of run them through a little boot camp in the summer while they're there. The workshop itself, there's no electronics allowed. We do everything with paper and pencils and dice and cards. I've found that electronics are a huge distraction in making games. I don't really see the need for them when you're learning the basics of games. You can learn everything you need with some dice and a deck of cards. And your pencil never crashes. It doesn't need software upgrades. The workshops themselves are about 2 to 3 hours. A lot of times I'll be teaching these and it'll be time to go, and I'll want to leave. Like the Saturday class I teach is about 5 hours long, and it's like taking my whole Saturday. I was like, I just want to go home. And they're like, no, we need to play this game some more. So that's always a big win when that happens. Then you know you're onto something if they just want to keep playing the game that they built. Like I mentioned, they focus on one specific topic, and you'll see that as we go through here. And no grades. I don't grade these things. So even though it's a class and they are getting a grade for the whole class, when they do one of these exercises, the point isn't to say, oh, you did good at the exercise, you get an A, and you did bad, you get a B. Instead, it's just you showed up, you participated, so you're going to get the credit for that day. But it's kind of important, but there are winners. So it's like you don't get a grade, but you won. So you're pretty awesome. And that, what I found is that little bit of competition, It gets the students engaged in the game in a way, like, I don't want them floating above it like a game designer and analyzing it. I want them down in it, so they're actually feeling the emotions that the players would feel while they're playing it. And the simple way to do that is I just egg them on. I'm like, oh, who's winning over here? Who's going to get the award at the end? Who's doing the best? And I really try to like encourage them to fight each other. And it actually makes the games a lot more emotionally charged. And then afterwards, then we can talk about the emotions they felt because they were down in there with them. All right, so before I get into the main games, I want to talk about this first day game when they first show up to class. And I'm not, at this point, trying to teach any design goals for this first one. What I'm trying to do is just say, hey, this is an icebreaker. Let's get to know each other. I need to know their personalities. There's always, in the class, there's always that one guy who knows everything about games already. And so he just comes in with this huge knowledge. And then there's a guy who's, the person who's more quiet and subdued, and you try to get them balanced out. And I try to get a mental read on who's who so I can know who to control and who to try to boost up a little bit. This first game, it's more, I want to get them active. I don't want them sitting there looking at a board and getting analysis paralysis and at some kind of exercise where they're just not talking or communicating, everything's in their head. Instead, I want to get everything out into the room as big as possible and just make a lot of noise and get them moving around. And then it really just set a tone for the semester. It's like, this class is not one where I'm going to stand up in front of the whiteboard and lecture to you while you take notes. Like, you better, like, you're going to get up, you're going to be moving around, you're going to really be an active participant of this class. So here's the kind of the first day thing. I was like, get up, get out of your desks, or get out of your seats. And this board, the floor, is a nice checkerboard tiled floor. You can kind of see it there. So you are the pieces. This is your board. Make a game out of this room. And they can do whatever they want. It's totally wide open. And usually somebody will like, how do we move? It's like, okay, you ask the question, you have to tell me. Right now, tell me how you're going to move. And then he has to make up something on the spot, like you can only move one square. Well, can we move diagonal? Oh, you asked the question, can you move diagonal? And I let them build the game basically by asking questions about what they can do next. And whoever asks the question has to answer it right away. So it's very fluid, very free form. In this particular class, this was a great one. You can kind of see, let me get my laser pointer, this curtain over here. It's one of those folding accordion curtains that separates a room in two. So they closed it. They divided the class into two groups, and they made a capture the flag where they built their own base in secret. And they tore up the whole room, stacked all the desks. And this is great because I teach the class on Saturday. There's almost no one else in the school, and I completely take advantage of that fact. So we tear everything up. We go into all the different rooms, and we make the whole school into the classroom and hope nobody walks in. They tear it up. Here they open up the curtains, and you can kind of see at this point their mazes, their little territories get linked together. This particular game, they had to roll dice, and you try to get it into that player's square. And it started out with just everybody had one die, and they would try to roll a 5 or 6, but that wasn't exciting enough. And by the end of the exercise, we had a coffee can full of dice that were all over the room. So they had the shotgun attack, where you could like grab as many dice in a hand as you can and just throw them across the room. And but there's friendly fire, so you have to watch out for that. So this is a great example of kind of an icebreaker game, but it's also, when I first started teaching this class, all my games were like this. It's like, get up, and here's a box of cool stuff, and go out there and make games out of it. And I would give a lecture about some topic and say, try to follow that topic in your exercise. And sometimes they would, and sometimes they wouldn't. But because the creativity, the problem space was, even though I constrained it, they had so much to work with. They had too much creative freedom, basically. So I started constraining, and it's like, no, don't do that, don't do that. And that's kind of how I got to the games that I'll be showing you, where it's like just removing stuff to get them to really focus on what I wanted them to focus on. So, before I could do this, there's a question like, well, what is a game? I'm going to teach you game design, but how do I teach you game design if I don't really know what a game is? And when you ask the students what is a game, they can't tell you. They don't know. They're not academics. They don't study this stuff like a lot of us in this audience do. And actually, when I first started teaching, I didn't study this stuff either. I had no idea what a game was. I couldn't define it myself. The reason that I taught game design was because I've been making games ever since I was a kid, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be great at teaching game design because I make games. But it turns out, when I was really tried to fill up that 15-week syllabus, it's like, wow, I can only do like 2 classes, and I'm drained of all my knowledge. This isn't going to work very well. So where's the sources back in 2001? There wasn't really a lot of game design classes back then. There was no textbooks. The Rules of Play book wasn't out yet. A lot of these books that we see now all the time didn't even exist back then. But I was a huge fan of magic cards, And there was a magazine called the Duelist magazine, which if you played Magic cards back then, you may have seen it. And Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic cards, wrote the back page, a column called Lost in the Shuffle. So I had a stack of these magazines, and I'm like, this is great. This is my curriculum right here. I'll just pull 15 of these articles, and I'll teach one of Richard Garfield's back of the magazine lessons every week, and I'll get through the whole program, and that didn't work either. But it gave me a lot of cool things to think about. Read through The Art of Computer Game Design by Chris Crawford, which I'm sure many of you have read. And that one is pretty good. It's more focused a little more on computer game design, and I didn't really want to teach computer game design. But there are some sections in there about just games in general, which I thought was really helpful. But the main one I found was Greg Kostikian's I Have No Words and I Must Design. So if you're familiar with this essay, it's just a really great way of just breaking down games to the fundamental. And it's not just electronic games. It's every game. It's all the way from hide and seek to chess, and from games like Battlefield and sports games like basketball, things like that. So you can break them all down. And so this really became my structure that I really kind of latched onto. I really liked the way that it was written. But if you've been to some of my previous talks, you know that I'm not really a big fan of gigantic essays with lots of words and text and no drawings in them. So I wanted to make my equivalent of what's the one-page design of Greg's essay. So I started kind of breaking it down into a simple drawing that I could give to my students. Actually what I found in the first few classes, I actually tried to get them to read this thing, and they would say, did you read it? And they would all say yes, but then you ask them questions and you realize they were just saying yes. They hadn't really read it anyway. And we all know what that's like if you're a student. So what are the fundamentals of game design? What is my one-page drawing of this that I could just draw on the whiteboard really quickly to get the idea across? So you start out, there's a start condition. You travel for some distance, you get to a goal, and if that's pretty obvious. But if that's all that was to it, I could make a game right now, which is, let's play this game. Everybody sit in the chair they're sitting in right now. You all win. Very good. Thanks for playing. Not very interesting. So we add some opposition in the way. This is what Greg would call struggle, that force you're trying to overcome to get to the goal. The way that I've drawn it here, though, of course, if I say, well, let's play this new game, I'm going to modify that last one because it was too boring. I'm going to say, when I say go stand on your chair, jump up and touch the ceiling, and the first one to touch it wins, that would not go over very well either. So what you do is you kind of break it down with decisions to work around these. And how do I move around this? Can I move through it or go under it, around it? How many different decisions are there? The rule system that binds the whole thing together, and this is how it defines what's going on inside that box. And then the last part, what I would call interaction, the input, but more importantly, the output coming from that system, also that sets the dynamics in motion of the system, makes it come to life. So this was it. This is my simple model. And now I can make a class about these different topics, and we'll just run through the curriculum. And this worked out pretty well. So I'm going to go through the different sections. Oh, actually, before I get into it, this drawing right here, it is great to define a game, but there's a question so what? If this is really true, if this defines every game, then it also defines every bad game ever made. And so it's now I know what a bad game looks like. Hey, it looks exactly the same as the best game ever made. So this is not too helpful. What we really want as a teacher, I want my students to make the best games possible, not just make a game, because you can phone that in, no problem. So I teach them to think about it as a series of slider bars. It's not a binary thing, this is a game or this isn't a game. That's not really important. We don't have a need for people to run around the world saying, oh, that's a game and that one's not a game. It's what makes it great. And so if you think of these as slider bars, the goal then of the game designer is to make all of these systems as cool as possible, to make them as great as they possibly can be. All right, so let's start out with the simple one, goals. Seems so simple, and yet as I started digging into it, I found it's actually quite rich. What I'm trying to get across here, the thing that would pull that slider from 0 up to 10 is the player's relationship to the goal really clear? Because if the goal isn't really clear, then the player doesn't really know what to do next or where they are through that. And more important, if you think of that blue line as the narrative that the player is going to engage in, is the drama increasing as the player gets towards the goal? Is there a sense of dramatic tension building up? Is the game getting more exciting? And we've all played games like Risk and Monopoly where they reach some kind of high point and then you play for an hour or more while everybody's really bored. So you can tune in that narrative by changing your start and your goal. We mostly think about the goal, but I think the start is just as important when you look at it from the other way. This is a game I didn't design, backgammon. How many people have played backgammon? How many people have played backgammon with the doubling cube? Keep your hands up. The doubling cube is this little thing in the middle. And if you've played with the doubling cube, have you played for money? Keep your hands up. So only the few 6 people with their hands up, you've played backgammon. Everyone else hasn't. Once you do that, you can't go back. The other thing is just so shallow. So anyway, I could give a whole talk about backgammon. In fact, in my class I do. It's 5,000 years old, so there's a lot of good in it, obviously, if it survived that long. What I want to point out for this, though, in the relation of start and end goals, is this is the board. If you haven't played backgammon, it looks incredibly cryptic. Most people, when I talk to them, they remember it as that board on the back of their checkers game that made no sense to them when they were a kid. And I see a lot of you nodding your heads, so yes, you know that. So what happens is the brown player, he'd be sitting over on the left, and he has to get all of his pieces off the board going around that big U shape. The white player sits on the right. He goes the other way. It still seems kind of weird. Why do they do that? Let me make it more obvious what's going on. If we split the board, you can kind of see much easier what's happening now. So it's actually, the board was split. If you look at the history of games, at some point it folded together for compactness or who knows what. But it kind of used to look like these tracks that were just going this way. But there's still this question of why is it like so seemingly random? Why are the pieces the way they are? Like, if I was the game designer of this game, I'd clean up that mess. I would do something like that. I would move all the pieces to the start spots because that would be like much cleaner and easier to do. Well, turns out that game that I'm showing you right now actually existed. There's artifacts that show games much like this. And it's really boring because you spend the first few moves doing nothing. You're not interacting at all. So at some point along the way, some brilliant primitive game designer, forefather of ours, he's like, you know what? This game would rule if we fought on the first turn. So let's move all of our pieces together. And then his son or whoever took up the lead was like, if we move more pieces, it'll be even better. So what they're doing is they're not tuning the goal. The goal's still exactly the same. They're tuning that start condition. And then you get, when you really look at what's going on, white only needs to move 2 pieces across the board. It's like this ancient buddy movie, you know, where these 2 guys have to like work their way through all odds and become friends at the end, you know, and finally overcoming their obstacles. So that's kind of a good example of the start, and I like it so much that I didn't bother making a game about the start stuff because, like I said, I love backgammon. But for the goal part, the other side of that line, we can tune that as well. So the exercise, the goal cards game has a goal. This talk gets kind of meta sometimes because I'm talking about game design to game designers, about games that teach game design. But this one has a goal to teach goals. But one of the exercise goals is, what are different goals? How can we break them down? There's not just one type, get here, or collect 100 points. Like, there's a whole bunch of those. Let's talk about them. Try to only change the goal, not the rules. So I'll make a game with very simple rules, and then you know, just only change the goal if we can. Try not to mess with the rest of the systems, and then talk about that. What does that mean? So the game is really as simple as I could make it. You reach into a bag, you pull out a colored poker chip. They have different values, a different distribution in the bag. You flick it onto the table and you try to hit another poker chip. And if you hit another poker chip, you score it. You put it on your side or into your cup there. So we start out with the really simple, like collect 100 points. What does this feel like? And then we tried a couple ways. One is you keep your points secret, and one is you display your points publicly. And we talk about the differences between those 2 things. Then we start messing around with, well, some timed goals. Collect the most points in 5 minutes. How does that feel different when you're just trying to collect 100 points? Collect the most chips in 3 minutes. Suddenly we talk about how that invalidated or just made the rule about colored chips now is meaningless because of the goal. And I see this a lot of time in game design where people will change the goal and not realize that they've actually made some of their rules meaningless to the game system. And then the other one over there, collect the most points in 5 rounds of play. That's kind of like saying, let's get rid of, that's almost like moving the start condition up. It's saying, let's just play the last 5 turns because those are probably the most exciting anyway. And let's see how that feels. And you know, some of these are more exciting than others. Some are more strategic. We talk about that. Then this idea of a negative goal, you're not trying to accomplish something, you're trying to avoid, or you're trying to be the last one standing while everyone else gets knocked out. And multiple goals, a bunch of cards, we deal them out randomly, and now you're playing, there's multiple things going on. We randomly change them, there's a deck of them, and you start flipping them down. And every time they win one of these games, they get a goal card, and they put it in their pocket. And through the series of exercises, they're collecting goal cards the whole time. And the idea is the winner's the one with the most goal cards at the end. The last little bit we do, there's secret goals that only you know what they are, and everybody else just has to kind of try to figure out what you're doing. And some of them are really crazy and almost impossible. So we finish that part, and then they have to make their own goal. Now they understand all about goals, all these different ways we can mix them and match them and play with them. So make your own. I give them a blank card. They play those for a while. Some are really off target. Some are really cool. We talk about which ones worked, which ones didn't. Also, we shuffle them all up so no one knows, like you draw them out. You don't get your own back again necessarily, although you could, so you have to be careful not to make something too impossible. Then, at the very end of it, I count up who has the most cards, and this is that winner thing that I was talking about. It's like, whoever has the most gold cards wins. I promote your card to the next year. So I'm going to do nice art for your card, put your name on it like a magic card artist, and promote you to next year's class. And that's like a huge goal for the students. They're like, oh, yeah, I want to be that one guy who gets to go forwards. Print that out for them, just kind of a fun little thing at the end. So as we go through the different phases, at the very end, I was like, well, we've been talking about goals, but you realize there's all these like sub-goals. We can break this thing down. So you're trying to win a chip as a goal of that particular turn. You're trying to win the cards, get the most cards, get your card promoted. And we can take that idea, everything I just talked about, the start and end, and the goal and the journey between, and we can start subdividing and subdividing, and think of our game as a series of chunks like that. All right, the next section, opposition. This is going to try to focus just on that red bar there in the middle and what game would really like bring that out to the class. So flow comes up a lot, this idea that you don't want the opposition to be too hard because then the game gets frustrating. You don't want to be too easy because then the game gets too boring. Try to get the player into that nice groove of flow. And this sense of accomplishment, like that the player feels really happy, that superior almost to the opposition as they work their way through and past the obstacle. Of course, if they can't get past it, then they're not going to feel that. But when they do get past it, you want them to feel this moment of triumph, a very emotional kind of feeling, and that means your opposition is well tuned. So the game that I came up with, being college students, I figured they would understand this one. Here's a red cup and a ping pong ball. Guess what you do with this? You know, it's really like, what's the most basic thing I can think of that will demonstrate this concept? And this came to mind. Even though I teach on Saturday, I still don't bring in beers. I haven't been that bold yet. So we talked about incremental difficulty tuning, how you can slowly kind of ratchet it up or turn it down. This difference between hard and soft obstacles. The hard obstacle would be like a wall. It's like you're not going through it, you have to go around it one way or another. And a soft obstacle, think of it like mud, that I can slog through it slowly. Giving the player an edge, you can make obstacles, as you know, all these different obstacles, but the player has to always have the edge. The rule system always has to let the player get through them all. And then the difference between opposition and opponents. Sometimes people get those confused, but opposition doesn't need to be your opponent. It could be just the board itself, the configuration. You could have a cooperative game where you're playing against a deck or whatever, but a game like basketball or football or something where your opponent is really the obstacle, the opposition in your way. So obstacle Pong, their first task, they go off into different rooms and they build a miniature golf course essentially. And their first task is build a par 1 course. Can you build a course that is par 1? Everybody can get the ball in the cup no matter what. Does everybody do that? Great. Let's move on to part 2. It's actually a little harder than you might think to do that. Then now step back and say, what's a par 2 course? And here it's like put a bottle of water on your head and throw it into the, if you got it into this area, you could move anywhere in that area and then just drop it. And the water is kind of that soft goal idea, or the soft obstacle idea. And then step back to par 3 and kind of keep working backwards. So they build out the series of obstacles until they get what should be a par 5 course. Here's some of the different things. Again, they tear up the rooms. They all have their own room. It's kind of fun at the end because it's like playing miniature golf. Like you run from hole to hole and you don't know what to expect in the other rooms. And you have to play your own course too. So here's one they're bouncing it off the art desks, trying to hit it into this cup over here. This one was fun. They went to the room with the curtains that went together and they turned off the lights on one side. So you have to kick it down this path, but you don't know what is on the other side. So there's kind of this little mystery element, which I thought was really a nice touch. This one here kind of shows what really happens, though, which I tell them it's a game design about obstacles. It's not really, it turns out, because ping pong balls are so finicky. And if they miss, who knows where they're going to go? They're going to roll all over the place. And so they end up spending more time funneling and helping the player try to get that ball in the cup. And here you can see they just like tore up posters off the walls, and they make it easier, make it easier. We've got to get that par one. We've got to get that thing down. And that's really one of the important lessons that this teaches. It's like it's not about helping, or it's not about hurting. It's about helping. Then the winning part is we actually keep score. I have these little score sheets. I play too. I think it's really important for the teacher, for me, to go and play these games as well. So I get involved in the system, and I try to win. Like, I don't hold back. In fact, I make a big point of trying to be the winner so I can rub it in. The other obstacle goal here, this is us versus it. Some of you may have played this at the GDC tutorials on Monday and Tuesday. The idea is let's work with that balance, not too hard, not too easy. So we give them a robot, and there's these tanks that are going to fight the robot. The idea is to tune for drama. I've talked about this dramatic arc, this dramatic tension that you want. And so I want them to make this feel like a movie. They get this robot programming sheet. They get in little teams, and first they're what I call the scientists. And the scientists get in teams, and their job is to program this super military robot in their lab, their secret lab somewhere. And they kind of fill it out. They give it a name like Doom Cuddles version 2.0. They fill out some instructions. They get like 10 slots to fill out. They get to put in the damage numbers and how it moves and rotates and things like that. And then they get to give it a little secret special goal, a special ability. This one was like a self-repair thing that every turn it gained a hit point automatically. But they've done jump jets and burrowing and call downs from satellites and all sorts of teleporting, things like that. So there's a huge space there for them to be creative in. Then they take their robot and fight against tanks. And the idea, the story here, is that the robot, of course, escapes from the lab. And now they become tank commanders because the robot's been programmed. They can't change the robot anymore. And they've got to now fight these tanks. And now the tanks now have to fight the robot to keep it from crossing the goal line. So the robot's trying to cross the board, and this is the orphanage right over here. And so if the robot crosses that line, he steps on the orphanage and kills all the kids. So it's trivially easy. Well, so the tanks, they're set. The students can't mess with the tanks. They have a very simple move, shoot, rotate kind of scheme, and that can't be changed. And at this point, the robot can't really be changed either. But what happens is it's trivially easy to make a robot that wins on the first turn because you give it 10 movement actions and it just wins on turn one. It's really easy to make a robot that dies on the first turn. You give it like one hit point and you have it turn around backwards, and then the tanks come in and shoot it from behind. So the goal here for the students is I want that Hollywood ending. I want the robot down to one hit point, about ready to step over the line, right when the last tank, because the other three have been blown up, and the captain's all bloody, he's like hitting the button, and then he blows up the robot. It's like, that's what I want. That's the tuning that I want. So since they can't do the tanks, they just keep going back to the robot, iterating on it, and seeing how it does. And eventually they get this robot that, hopefully, after an hour or so, is like this perfectly tuned robot. The trick here at the end, there's always a trick on these, is that I didn't really want them to fight the tanks. I wanted them to fight each other. And since they've all tuned to the same tanks, and you can't change the tanks, the idea, which usually turns out to be pretty close to truth, is that the robots are all balanced with each other, even though they're completely different, because they've all been tuned to the same thing. And even though they have teleporters and laser call downs and burrowing and all this other stuff, it's amazing how close these battles are. The other thing that I find is pretty amazing is that there's no decisions in this game. Like you've made your decisions up front. So when the gameplay actually plays out, you just follow the program, and that's all you can do. And how exciting it is. You would think that would be like, that's kind of boring. You're just going to sit there and watch these things go, but it's not that way at all. It's like everybody's cheering, because you can't see enough ahead in the future that you don't really know what's going to happen. And then when it plays out, there's just a lot of like cheering and ohs and ahs and laughing, which is great. So we really get that drama. So each robot running its own little sheet there. All right, so moving on. The idea of decisions and how we get around those obstacles. Sid Meier gave the talk yesterday about interesting decisions, so I'm not going to go into that at all. I'll refer to his talk. I'm sure he has a lot more to say about it than I do anyway. But it's really true. It's like, what am I doing as a player? You give me a million decisions, but if only one of them is good, then that's not a very interesting choice. This feeling of creativity and discovery, though, is the emotion that I really want to bring out in the players, that I want the students to experiment with. How does the player feel like they did something really creative? Maybe the game designer didn't even think of this. And that's a really good win for the player to feel like they're better than the designer of the game, and that discovery that comes from that. So 100 zombies. One of my games last year that I showed the weapons of zombie destruction, I had over-purchased zombies. So I had a huge drawer full of little plastic zombies. I'm like, I got to do something with these. So we're going to use those in this game. It's really about balancing those decisions with each other so that all the decisions are worthwhile, that you don't always pick this one and never another one. I also really want to encourage expression and role-playing with this exercise. So I pulled some pieces out of a game called The Last Night on Earth, a zombie horror type game. And these are all just like the archetypical, the stereotypes that you would see in a B-grade zombie movie. These different characters, like the boy genius and the jock. And so I really want them to if they're playing one of those characters, I want them to feel like they are that character. It's not just they're pushing a piece of cardboard around. They are a boy genius. And how are the decisions going to make you feel that way? And then you combine these characters at the end to see this new story start to form. As these different characters come together, how does the narrative change? So the game itself is, as all these are, try to be very simple with them. You set up a bunch of zombies around the perimeter. If you want to try to run this game on your own, you can either you can just search bag O zombies, and you can get like a huge bag of zombies for like $10, which is what I did about 20 times. So I've got thousands of these. Then you can also just use pennies. I've seen people run it with pennies before, and then it's kind of like these Abraham Lincoln zombies are attacking, which can cost you $1 to do that. Then you roll a die. And the direction that you roll is the direction that all the zombies will move. So if you roll a 3, then they all move towards the 3 side. And if you roll, in this case, a 2, they're all moving up. So eventually they're going to close in on the player and kill him. But, of course, the player doesn't just stand still. The player needs to have some decisions, some interesting decisions to work with. So there's the full rules of the game. They fit on one little card. And Rule 2 is the only one you need to pay attention to, which is insert your rules here. And this is the one I give to the students. It's like, give me the list of decisions based on your character. So how does a priest move? How does a priest attack? And I don't have them do the mechanics. That's not important at this phase of the game. Just tell me what priests do. And tell me the verb. Tell me the words that describe what priests do. And they come up with things like this. And then the town drunk team, meanwhile, in another corner, they have their own set. And hopefully they're completely different than the priest, although sometimes they align. I don't know how that works, but I'm just kidding. So you build those up, and then you kind of play out your game. Then you add mechanics behind all of those, like what does it mean to step versus stagger? Is it, for step maybe you have one space, but the jock might be able to sprint instead of step. And then the drunk might roll a die and randomly move in a direction, and that's a stagger. So then they have to translate that word into a mechanic in the game. Play it for a while, do a little bit of balancing with the decisions. And then we join the boards together. So now there's 2 characters with double the number of zombies, and then we'll double that. So then you get close to 100 zombies and 4 characters. And at this point, I know it's a success if they're really role-playing their characters. And what I'm listening for is people talking in accents, people slurring their words if they're the drunk, people actually holding their hands if they're the priest. Trying to really get that sense. Then they're really engaged and they're really into it from the level that they're now down in that world. All right, the rule systems, what makes a rule system good? It's the old cliche, easy to learn, and you all know the second part, a lifetime to master. For beginning students, they don't always think of this as you get both. There's a feeling of it's kind of a teeter-totter. It's like if you make it easy to learn, then it's not going to be a lifetime to master, and vice versa. And so really trying to teach them is no, you want both of these things. They're independent vectors. You want them to get as high up as possible, and that's really important to try to get that idea across in the rule system. So there's a series of little exercises that I do. This is actually over 3 weeks as kind of a warm-up when they first come into class to wake them up in the morning on a Saturday. So we'll talk about rule structure and organization, how to really lay them out so that people can understand them, how to write rules with precision so that people, they're not ambiguous, that other people besides you know what you're talking about, and how to simplify your rule system down so that it's really easy to learn No matter how many rules you have, you can still make them simple if you're phrasing them in the right ways. So the kind of first week is the take a stick and make a rule game. I write that on the board. I put up a bag of sticks, and we go around the room. You walk up front, grab a stick, make a rule. Some of you may have played games like this. So they come up front and make their rule. Hey, if you get a green stick, give it to someone else. If you have 2 green sticks, then you have to sing or hum poker face. And so then immediately the next person goes up and grabs a green stick and gives it to the first person to get that funny thing going on. You have to close your eyes when taking a stick, so you can't just keep grabbing green sticks. When moving around the room, you have to hop on one foot because you have to go back and forth and sing Mary Had a Little Lamb when your eyes are closed, on and on. Keep your hands behind your back. So they start stacking up all these rules one by one. And at some point, I'm like, what are you guys trying to really do here? Because it's hilarious what they're doing. Like, they're bouncing all around and singing these songs, and they're all laughing. They're having the greatest time ever. But you realize this game will never end. It's like, because they have no goal. So it's really getting that point back again. It's like, without a goal, this is completely meaningless exercise. I don't know, meaningless. It's actually a blast. But it teaches that lesson. So then the next week, we're like, now that we learned that lesson, let's define a goal. Let's define our setup. Let's be more specific about this. And this is a similar thing. Get 50 points in front of you. So you're trying to get dice in front of you, and the top face is how many points you have. And this time they still pick a die and they make a rule, but I put them all sequentially in order, and you have to follow it like a turn order. You can only do 1, you can only do 2. The first one, the one I just showed you, it's like spaghetti. It's really hard to analyze what you should be doing at any one point in time because all the rules are cross-referring to other ones. This one is like you only have to look at number 6. That's it. Ignore everything else. Now look at number 7, and so on. This game is much more organized. It gets boring really quick. Unlike the first one, which is more and more exciting and weird, this one drags on as you start to step through all these rules, and it gets really kind of tedious to run through after a while. It starts out good, but it usually starts to dive really quick. Then the last one is try to get the best poker hand with 5 cards. Now what we're going to do is everybody's still making rules, but they can delete other rules. They can insert them in the turn order wherever they want. And they can really basically kind of define this little structure, try to get it as simple as possible to make the game as entertaining as possible. Also, I have them play simultaneous on this one. So everybody's doing all the stuff at the same time as much as possible. And that keeps the flow really going. Everybody's engaged instead of waiting for the person before them to take 11 actions before they get their 11 actions. The more advanced version of this is the Card Wars game. And this one's really about creating modular rules. They'll get these little rule cards, and they'll make a rule for each one of the suits in the deck. How to balance those, they'll be doing this independently, and so they have to try to, and secretly, and then they all get pushed together, and then they have to try to balance them across the room as they start to move around. I'll talk about that in a second. As the rules get passed around, you're reading other people's rules. So you have to make these interpretations that you don't know if that's really what their intention was. That's the main part of the exercise, actually, is getting people to try to understand other people's rules and talk about how the language is causing problems in interpretation. And then this last part, easy to learn, right? We're going to be making, 30, 40 rules are going to be swirling around the system. How do we make them easy to learn? We have a lot of rules. There's tricks we can do to make that happen. So the game itself is just War. We've all played War. You get a deck of cards. In this case, they're just 1 through 10, so they have 40 cards, 10 of each suit. Flip over the top one. Highest wins, gets a poker chip. When you get 10 poker chips, you win the game. The fun part comes in with the rules, though. So they have these 4 cards, and when you flip over a spade, you get to trigger your spade rule. And the other person will have a different spade rule based on what they came up with. So to try to get this easy memory tricks, I don't have them do the mechanics, just like with that 100 zombies thing. Just give me the word. So spades, we say they're military, they're attack, they're aggressive. So give me a phrase, a word that implies something aggressive, something attacking, like arrows flight. Then once they get those words written down, then go back in and do the mechanics. And now you have the shortcut, this easy way of remembering, oh, I have an arrow. And then, in this case, you're dropping arrows onto the floor and trying to get them to land face up. So I won't go through all of these, but they all follow the same thing. Diamonds are about trying to get extra points, so they're usually a way of getting extra poker chips that you maybe didn't deserve to get through the normal mechanics of the game. Staffs, we have this kind of nature feel for them. Here they're kind of, instead of just pulling from the top of their deck, they're building up a hand of cards, and they can make a decision. And this last one, the consolation present, the hearts are about giving and healing. So maybe taking cards from the discard pile and putting them back in your deck, or giving bad cards to your friends in this case. So they kind of make those cards up. We shuffle them all up. You get your 4. You move around the room. And then we just kind of play it out. And the idea is that you correct the card if something seems wrong, even though it's not your rule to begin with. Try to make it easier to understand. If something's too strong, then make it weaker. If something's too weak, make it stronger. And the goal then is at the end of the session, an hour or so, we should have a really balanced set of rules, even though everybody was independently in their own little rule module at any one time. We try to see how that would all come together. And that usually comes out pretty well. There's a few that usually get just wadded up and thrown away. But overall, the game gets pretty interesting. All right, the interaction, the last section here. There's actually a lot here with interaction, and trying to like there's more than one exercise that just what I would be able to come up with to really get the richness of what I mean by interaction. So the easy part, of course, is that it's the ease of input, the user interface. How do I talk to the game as a player? And that's kind of an obvious concept, and we all understand that. The more subtle one is, how does the game talk back to me, talk back to the players? And this one is kind of like, what tricks can you use as a designer to get your game to talk, to speak to the players that are playing it? Well, one way is I'm going to reward you. You're going to pay attention to me if I reward you. So if the game system's outputting rewards, then I'm going to want to put more stuff in so I get those rewards back out again. The other thing I really look for, the thing that would slide the interaction slider from 0 to 10, would be this immersive atmosphere. This idea that I'm really in this game right now. I've crossed that dotted line there. I'm not sitting at the table. I'm down inside the system. And if you can pull that off, then you know your game is really communicating well with the players. And this is a lot of subtle things. It's just like color choices and fonts and the pieces that they're touching, things like that can really help pull people into it. So this is one of my favorite games. I look forward to this one every year, a roll dice fast game. So I want to show them the power of rewards. And like any good teacher, I used to do this B.F. Skinner kind of lecture about reward systems. And we've all heard these things before, so we know how that lecture goes. And I decided I'd rather actually be B.F. Skinner and have the students be my rats. So I'm going to stand up front, and I'm going to actually run them through some exercises. They don't know it. I was like, hey, let's play a fun game. Roll double sixes, and try to do that as many times as you can. I can get them to do this for over 30 minutes. My record is an hour. On top of that, they're standing up the whole time. They're more and more engaged as the game goes on. And it turns out that it's just they're having a great time. So how it works is you treat them like rats. So you start out and say, here's a bunch of poker chips. Every time you roll double sixes, call freeze, and you get a poker chip. If somebody else has a 7, when you called freeze, take a poker chip from them. That's basically the whole rules of the game. Now, it's all simultaneous. You're not taking a turn. So your only real decision, as it were, is to, like, I don't know if there is one. You want to roll fast. Like, if you have a 7 on the table, you want to get it off the table. If you don't have double sixes, you want to be the one with the double sixes. And so that means as soon as they hit, you pick up. And as soon as you hit, you pick up. And so we exhaust the pool of poker chips. We see who has the most, and that person wins. And a lot of them are like, yeah, that's pretty interesting. That's kind of fun. It's like, well, as poker chips, like, let's play for cookies. So I get out the Pepperidge Farm, the really nice ones. Don't get just the cheap cookies. You want to get really nice ones. And you set them in and you blow the scent as you open the bag. You make sure everybody can smell it. You try to really get them engaged in that. And then it's like, go for cookies. So now they're like, oh, this game's great. I love this game. I'm trying to roll sixes. Then we step it up. We're like, hey, how about I pull out a bunch of quarters and throw them down? We're going to play for real money now. The thing with cookies is you only really need 1 or 2, and then you're kind of like, I don't need any more cookies. But if you're a college student, you want all the quarters you can get, especially with the vending machines right down the hall. So now we play for the quarters. And by this point, they're really into this game. So they're like, this is the best game I've ever played. We should play this every week. I love this game. I can't wait to play this game with my friends. And it's like, oh, you're rolling double sixes, okay. And then, of course, I step it up. It's like, all right, it's on. I pull out 21s from my pocket and just like throw them down on the table. I was like, this is the real thing now. That was child's play, what you guys were doing. We're deep in this now. And then now at this point, they're just off the wall. Like, they're loving this game so much. So, it's basically I'm showing them that, hey, you guys are not much different than rats and pigeons and all those other things. I can get you to do these things. It's fun. Real quick, is anybody in the audience, one of my students played this game? I'm curious if there's anybody. Okay, I don't see anybody. Sometimes some of my students show up. Oh, okay, back there. All right. So what had happened, though, is I was losing money every time I ran this exercise. So, and I'm just standing there, and you can imagine me, like I've got my white lab coat on and my clipboard, and stupid students. I can manipulate them any way I want. I'm so cool. But I'm losing money, so I'm like, I might as well play because I could get some of my money back. And it turns out this game is awesome. It really is. I don't know why, but it's really fun. And try it yourself and see. Like, I totally get into it. I get all excited. Like, it's amazing. So the simple things you can do by throwing money at people, it's the power of that. It's great. All right. So the other game that we do for Atmosphere, and this is what I was talking about, just the fonts, just the colors, things like that, is I have them just bring in some board games from home. And we basically just hold up the boxes and say, hey, look at these boxes and tell me how you should feel, how the marketing people, how the graphic designer wants you to feel. Without even opening the box, just describe that to me. What font did they use? What color? Did they tilt the font? Is it kind of jumbled or is it really straight? Is it cursive font like Trivial Pursuit, things like that? And then they combine the two games. We do a little mashup thing where it's just like, take these two games, I randomly put people together, and they just kind of have fun. This one's a little more open-ended. It's not really about the game that they come up with. It's just about talking about the pieces. So the one rule of the game is they can't use the rules of the game they brought in. They can only use the pieces. They have to make a new game. So here was the Battleship Jenga, where you're trying to build a Jenga tower and then, I guess, blow it up by calling numbers out as they work their way up. Here, though, you can kind of see the difference from what I was talking about. Like, look at the Jenga font versus look at the Battleship font. Like, you can clearly see right away the mood they're trying to set without even opening the box. One's going to be really whimsical. The other is like, look at that kid over there, and he's like crazy into that game. All right. This one, StarCraft, the board game, combined with Gloom. If you play that game, it's the game you try to get everybody depressed so they commit suicide. And so I guess in this one, you're traveling around the galaxy trying to depress people. I'm not sure. Trivial Pursuit combined with this co-op game called Pandemic. Some of you may have played. I'm not sure what they ended up with that one. I can't remember. And the last one here, this was Settlers of Catan, plus a game called Tannhauser, which is a squad-based tactical game. So they've got these troops running across their settlers' world, I think they turned the roads into bunkers or something like that. So just kind of just a fun mix-up thing. But you can kind of see all these different pieces and then the moods that can be set by them. The differences in the packaging alone and the pieces that you play with makes a huge difference in immersion into the game system. This last one here is, see how am I doing on time? Okay. The Squadron. So I've been trying to teach probabilities and statistics for a long time, and I'm in this class because I think it's really important for game designers as far as the interaction, the output of your game. It's really helpful as a game designer to know what your game can do. And if you only have to wait for play tests, it's too slow. So if you can use math and probability statistics to figure out what your game can output in advance, that's a huge win. And so I've been trying to teach the students this, and it just usually fails. I spent some time like, what's the game that teaches probability and statistics with no math? Because a lot of these students, there's usually one or two programmers in the class, but a lot of times it's artists. And as soon as I do any math at all on the whiteboard, they just fall asleep. It's just amazing. So it was really kind of a challenge for a while for me to get to come up with something. I'm still working on this one, but it's coming along pretty well. Slowly progress in difficulty. The idea here is I'm going to borrow from my own lessons. This is kind of another meta part of this talk where I'm using my own design lessons to help make games for the class. And so the obstacle Pong one with the par 1, I'm like, let me start with a par 1 obstacle and then par 2, and I'll keep stepping back until I get like the par 5 problem, and then figure that they won the game of learning math. And then this idea of like, let's simulate thousands of play sessions. Let's not just go by what we find out in the class here. So here's what I used to do. I used to give them something like this, and you feel free to try to solve this if you want. You probably want to download the slides. The answers are in the PowerPoint and the notes thing, but I'm not going to go through it right now. But this is very dry, kind of typical math problem you would get in any math class that you went through high school, purposely with a lot of junk in there to get the player or the student to try to tease out the important bits of information. and it doesn't really work. Most players, or most, keep calling them players, most students, they just don't even do it. Like they would never turn in their homework. So it's like, what's the simple game? Okay, here's the simplest game I can think of. You each have one die. You're going to roll a die. Whoever gets the highest wins. Draw that probability table. It's like, well, that's so trivial. It's like, of course, that's easy. Now compute the odds for me. Well, there's 15 red X's there, and there's 15 black X's, so the odds are 50-50. Good job. Super simple. Par 1. Like, you cannot fail this, I guarantee. It's so obvious. So everybody comfortable with that? All right, let's move on. I'm going to try not to give you the lecture while I'm talking here. Then I give them some stickers. They have to make their own custom die. It has to add up to 21, but they don't know what everybody else is making. This is an interesting problem. I've actually, if anyone of you want to solve it and send me the answer, is there one die that's better statistically than any other die you could possibly make? Or is it like rock, paper, scissors? No matter what die you come up with, you can think of a die that beats that. And I still haven't really figured the answer myself out. And I've been trying to get some programmer, somebody to write the program that will do that for me. So, you can do these different kinds of dice and play with them. And then they have to make the odds table for that. So here the white person is a standard die. The blue person's modified theirs a little bit. Take that same chart, hook them together. Oh, that's 16 blue X's, and that's only 15 black X's. So 48%, 52. The blue die is clearly better. But then Mr. Green die comes in, mixes things up a bit. He comes in and he gets the edge, a big edge, over that blue die. So they play with that for a while and try to figure out like whose die was the best and do this little competition. Then we move on to number tiles. These are, unlike a die that you don't know what it's going to be every time, the number tiles, we play two ways. One is just randomized, and one you actually get a pick and set down the number of your choice. But you use it up, you can't use it again. And so this table, as you start to use things up, well, the first turn, it's 50-50, of course. But then when red plays 4, black plays 2, you redo that chart, figure out now on the next turn after that, what are the odds? And they start to shift depending on what you play when. So as they kind of work their way through the exercise, the chart gets more and more constrained until the last turn you know who will win 100% of the time. So just kind of work their way through. Again, you can kind of see what I'm doing here. It's just like step, 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 little, 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 little. And we're not really doing any math. Then the real game comes in. And the real game here is I get these little spaceships to them. I give them 2 4-sided dice, a 6-sided and a 10-sided, and say, you have engines, weapons, and shields. When you first attack, you roll the weapon, or you roll the movement, and whoever rolls the movement the highest gets to roll 2 weapons. The person with the lowest movement only gets to roll 1 weapon, and then you're trying to roll higher than their shield roll. So again, this is kind of a fun little problem. It's like, what is the best ship configuration? Like, should you have fast movement so you get to roll 2 weapons, and then you can have lower weapons? And so there's like a lot of different ways to think about it. We then play this game. I go around the room and say, which ship was the best? Because they fight everybody else's ship, and they kind of keep track of whose was better. And they all say something different. It's like, oh, movement's clearly better. No way, weapons are better. Oh, shields are much better. And that's kind of what I hope happens, because the sample size is so low that they jump to conclusions anyway. And I see this happen even at my work all the time, of people with a sample size of 1 telling you that your game is broken. So you want to get them to like, hey, do we really know this is true? Then open my laptop. I have this little Excel spreadsheet. We type in the numbers on the ships, and I can actually tell them and simulate like, you know what? No, in this case, the blue ship will do 76 damage over 100 attacks, where the red ship, the B ship, will do 86 damage. So clearly, the red ship is better than the other one. So just kind of showing them that the power of being able to actually clearly know the answer instead of just using a small sample set. And I think that series of kind of stepping through is actually pretty successful. I'm still kind of tuning this stuff and different things with it, but it's actually showing some promise. All right, so let me wrap up here. I'm getting kind of down to the final few minutes. Putting it all together, towards the end of the work, or the end of the semester, we start combining all these ideas once we get the basics all figured out. And there's a lot of games. Actually, when I was going through trying to pick the games for this talk, I realized how many of these I have. I have like at least another 10, 20 that I could have pulled out. Most of them start to fall in towards the end, where we're just talking about all those ideas and building upon them. I'll just use this one as an example because it touches on a lot of the different things. The casino exercise. You've got to make a casino game. It's better have a really obvious goal. Better have some really interesting decisions to get the player there. It needs simple rules. You don't want somebody spending a lot of time trying to figure out the rule systems. You use reward and atmosphere to entice players to play your game. but you need to make a profit. So you actually need to make more money than you're giving away in rewards. So they go off to their own separate rooms as little teams. They build these casino games, and we pull them all back together. We take over the lunchroom, and we turn it into a casino. And this is always dangerous when the dean happens to make a surprise trip in on Saturday. And everybody's rolling dice and cards and poker chips everywhere and lots of noise. Also, when there's always a few students in on Saturday from other classes, especially towards the end of the semester with finals. And so when they come down the hall to see what all the noise is about, I give them a stack of chips. I was like, come on in. This is where it's happening. Come on in, spend these chips. And then you get this kind of outside view. So there's really two goals. There's like the winning house, the house that makes the most money. And they get a special reward trophy for winning. And then the winning player, the one who can take advantage of the most systems. So you have your house stash and your own personal stash. I won't go into these in detail, but just a few of them. This is a pirate-type game where you're trying to sink ships and you deal random cards onto the ships. This one was I think, Uncharted Ruins or something like that, where you're exploring these different temples for gems, basically rolling dice, trying to fit them into certain packages. Big Payout was this game. It's just a simple board. You're trying to move around. You can cash out along the way as you work your way to the final goal, or you can risk it all to keep going to the next cash out spot until you get to the big payout. And they would actually kind of yell that, who wants big payout? Come over here. And try to pull, they're like carnival barkers almost. They're really trying to actively pull people's money into their systems. And this one, Don't Wake the Dragon, another kind of risk-reward game where you're grabbing dragon gold, but he may wake up at any moment and eat you. So a lot of different things that they have a lot of fun with this one. But it kind of stresses all the different things about rewards and decisions and goals and everything, and putting it all together. All right, so got just a couple minutes here. Let me just wrap up with a few final thoughts of all of this. So just spent an hour talking about these games. Take what you want from them, from this talk, but play them if you really want to understand what I'm talking about. So, listening to me talk about games is not the same as what I'm saying you should be doing. But don't take what I made as oh, Stone said this is the game. We can't change the rules. Just the opposite. Make it your own. Do whatever you can to make that game meet the needs or teach you the lesson. As a game designer, I make these games, and they're simple. They're so simple. But I learn from them every single year that I teach these. I've been doing this stuff for 10 years now, and I still learn new things. It always surprises me. So, you can't stop learning. You drill on the fundamentals because there's a lot there. There's a lot of richness there that keeps revealing itself that comes into these big, complicated games, these million-dollar games that we make. And then finally, my last point here is if you are a designer and everything that I talked about in this talk is yeah, I understand all that. That's cool. You didn't really tell me anything new I didn't already know. Then you should be a teacher. Go out. Now, I'm not saying go down. Thank you. I'm not saying go down to your college or whatever and sign up to be a professor. Go to your QA department and say, hey, who wants to learn more about game design? And I bet almost everybody in that QA department will raise their hand. Just take a lunchtime, pull them over to a lunch table, have them play a game with you. One of these games are really simple, and you can educate. It's a two-way thing. And by educating, you'll learn. Trust me. All right, so I'll leave it at that. All the games, I'm going to, hopefully next week, have them up on my website at stonetronics.com. So you'll be able to download PDFs of all of this stuff, all the rules, everything should be there. But they're not there yet unless you really want to dig around because I've run these exercises in the past. So a lot of them are up there, but you have to search. If you wait a week, they'll all be in one nice folder. And I'll leave it at that. I don't think we have time for questions, unfortunately, but feel free to come up afterwards if you want to talk about this. Thank you.